Top 5 most powerful intercontinental ballistic missiles in the world of Burkina Faso. When the world talks about deterrence, it speaks of giants of Russia, with its 977 nuclear warheads, of the United States with its Minuteman III missiles, of superpowers locked in a cold calculus of destruction. For decades, the language of global security has been written in megatons and missile silos. Smaller nations were expected to simply watch from the sidelines, hoping that the giants would never crush them underfoot. But in the Sahel, under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a new chapter began to be written. And this chapter carried a message more radical than any nuclear arsenal. Deterrence does not have to be expensive, and it does not have to be foreign. It can be built at home, with intelligence, creativity, and sovereignty. Traoré asked his generals a question that seemed absurd at first. Why should Burkina Faso define its safety in terms chosen by others? Why should we fear the shadow of weapons we could never afford, instead of creating our own system of deterrence, one that fits our land, our people, and our future? It was a question that flipped the script. Where others thought in terms of billions, Traoré thought in terms of balance. Where others thought of nuclear fire, he thought of practical independence. Thus was born what Burkinabe soldiers now call the Iron Deterrent, a doctrine not of mass destruction, but of resilient survival. It was not about building weapons to destroy cities across oceans. It was about making sure no power, no mercenary army, no foreign corporation could ever threaten Burkina Faso without paying a cost too high to bear. At the heart of this doctrine were weapons that looked humble compared to the nuclear monsters of Moscow or Washington, yet carried within them the same psychological force, the power to make an enemy hesitate. Faso iron tanks, swarming drones, precision rifles, and unstoppable grenades. The very same weapons that had already transformed the Burkinabe army were now elevated from tools of war to symbols of deterrence. Together they formed a shield that no invader could ignore. But Traoré's brilliance went deeper. He understood that deterrence is not just about weapons, it is about credibility. A superpower may have thousands of warheads, but only a few are needed to change the calculations of its enemies. In the same way, Burkina Faso did not need nuclear fire. It needed weapons that were guaranteed to work, guaranteed to strike back, and guaranteed to be available in numbers that would overwhelm any aggressor. That credibility was built into every detail of the Iron Deterrent. Take the tanks. For example, cheap enough to be produced in numbers, durable enough to outlast foreign machines, and powered by biofuels from local farms. Each one was a moving fortress, a reminder that an invader would have to fight not just an army, but an entire economy mobilized for defense. Or consider the drones, swarms of small, agile machines that could watch every move, strike at will, and overwhelm defenses with sheer numbers. For a fraction of the cost of a single foreign jet, Burkina Faso could field 100 eyes in the sky, ready to blind and harass any attacker. And then there were the rifles and grenades, humble, simple, but devastating when multiplied across a population determined to defend itself. A rifle that never jams, a grenade that always explodes. These are not just weapons, they are promises. Promises that every Burkinabe fighter, from soldier to farmer, would have the tools to resist. In the mathematics of deterrence, that mattered more than megatons. Western analysts at first dismissed this doctrine as naive. How could Burkina Faso's weapons compare to nuclear arsenals? But slowly, the brilliance became clear. Deterrence is not about matching your enemy weapon for weapon. It is about convincing them that attacking you will never be worth the price. In that sense, Traoré had created the perfect deterrent, one that cost little but promised devastation to anyone foolish enough to try. In Ouagadougou, military parades took on a new symbolism. When Faso iron tanks rolled by, when drones filled the skies, when soldiers carried rifles made in Burkinabe factories, the people cheered not for destruction, but for dignity. Children waved flags, not because they dreamed of war, but because they understood their nation was safe. For the first time in living memory, Burkina Faso was not a passive spectator of global power. It was a player, a nation with its own shield, its own voice, and its own destiny. And that is the true genius of Ibrahim Traoré's iron deterrent. It proved that a small nation need not cower in the shadow of nuclear giants. It proved that intelligence can replace intimidation, and sovereignty can replace dependency. It proved that deterrence is not about the size of your arsenal, but the strength of your will. The world may still speak in the language of megatons and missile ranges, but in Burkina Faso, the language of deterrence is spoken in simpler, prouder words: tanks, drones, rifles, grenades. Together, they say what every Burkinabe knows in their heart: attack us, and you will pay a price too high to endure. And so, while the giants of the world threaten each other with apocalyptic weapons, Burkina Faso has quietly built a doctrine of survival, one that may yet inspire nations across Africa. Because in the end, deterrence is not about who can destroy the world. It is about who can ensure they are never destroyed. And in that battle of ideas, Ibrahim Traoré has already won. In the age of nuclear giants, when Russia boasts of its 28 rupees, Sarmat and America flaunts its Minuteman III, most nations are expected to watch from the sidelines, powerless to shape the conversation. But Ibrahim Traoré refused to let Burkina Faso live in silence. If the world's strongest deterrents were missiles that could circle the globe, then Burkina Faso would create its own symbol of deterrence, not in size, not in destructive yield, but in intelligence. That vision gave birth to what Burkinabe soldiers now call the Sky Spear, a homegrown missile system designed to embody the very essence of smart deterrence. The Sky Spear is not an intercontinental behemoth capable of vaporizing continents. It does not need to be. Its purpose is simpler, sharper, and far more revolutionary: to guarantee that any aggressor, no matter how well armed, will hesitate before laying a hand on Burkinabe soil. While the superpowers pour billions into nuclear silos, Burkina Faso's Sky Spear was built in local workshops using a philosophy of efficiency. Engineers studied the lessons of ICBMs and asked, what makes them truly fearsome? The answer was not only range or warhead count, it was unpredictability, mobility, and the certainty of retaliation. And so, the Sky Spear was born as a two-stage solid-fuel missile, light enough to be mounted on mobile launchers, hidden deep in the Sahel's rugged terrain, and launched from locations no satellite could predict. Its range, though modest compared to giants, was perfectly adapted to Africa's geography. With a reach of thousands of kilometers, it could strike at any hostile base, any mercenary compound, any staging ground where enemies of Burkina Faso might assemble. It did not need to cross oceans. It only needed to ensure that anyone in the region who dreamed of domination would think twice. But the brilliance of the Sky Spear lay not only in its range, it lay in its adaptability. Each missile was designed to carry multiple payload options: conventional warheads for battlefield strikes, EMP devices to disable enemy electronics, and, in the most secretive versions, experimental hypersonic gliders designed by young Burkinabe engineers. These warheads may not rival nuclear blasts, but their precision and versatility made them far more useful in real conflicts. Why destroy a city when you can blind an army? Why threaten annihilation when you can guarantee paralysis? That was Traoré's genius. Deterrence not built on fear of extinction, but on certainty of consequence. Soldiers began to call the Sky Spear the Hand of Faso. In exercises, the missiles would vanish into hidden launch tubes disguised as ordinary trucks, moving silently through villages before unfolding, like a spear raised to the heavens. Villagers who once saw foreign convoys passing their lands now saw Burkinabe-built machines, painted with national colors, carrying the weight of sovereignty. Children pointed at them with pride, not fear. The people understood what foreign analysts could not. These missiles were not about destruction, they were about dignity. Western observers at first dismissed the Sky Spear as symbolic, nothing more than propaganda. But as intelligence reports began to surface of successful test launches, precision strikes in desert trials, and the growing fleet of mobile launchers, the tone changed. Analysts realized that the true danger of the Sky Spear was not in its firepower, but in its affordability. For the cost of a single foreign missile system, Burkina Faso could field an entire brigade of Sky Spears, each one hidden, mobile, and impossible to neutralize in a single strike. This was deterrence, democratized. No longer could wealth alone guarantee dominance. Traoré had changed the rules. Intelligence, mobility, and resilience mattered more than size. The impact on Burkinabe society was electric. Universities saw a surge of students entering aerospace programs. Farmers, who once felt disconnected from national defense, now supplied the biofuels that powered the mobile launch vehicles. Local welders and machinists became proud participants in the missile program, their hands forging not just metal, but history. The Sky Spear was not a foreign import. It was a national creation, and that made every citizen a stakeholder in defense. In a speech unveiling the system, Traoré said, "The giants built weapons to destroy the world. Maulais. We build weapons to ensure the world cannot destroy us. Our Sky Spear is not aimed at innocent cities. It is aimed at arrogance, at those who would think Africa can never defend itself." His words resonated far beyond Burkina Faso. Across Africa, young people watched with amazement. For the first time, they saw an African nation developing its own missile system, not to copy the West, but to outsmart it. The symbolism was immense. If Burkina Faso could do this, why not others? If a landlocked nation in the Sahel could create its own deterrent, then no African nation had to live forever under the shadow of foreign weapons. On the battlefield, the Sky Spear proved its worth in simulated scenarios. Mobile launchers emerged from camouflage, fired their payloads, and disappeared before counterstrikes could be organized. The missiles struck with precision, their electronic warfare variants disrupting communications, their conventional warheads obliterating mock targets. Observers admitted grudgingly that even without nuclear fire, these weapons had created a credible shield. For invaders, that credibility was enough. No general wants to march into a land where every hill may hide a missile, every convoy may unfold into a launch system, and every strike may blind their forces. That fear, that hesitation, is deterrence in its purest form. And so, the Sky Spear became more than a missile. It became a doctrine. It told the world that Burkina Faso may be small, but it is untouchable. It told the people that their nation was not waiting for superpowers to grant them safety. It was building its own. And it told Africa that deterrence was no longer the privilege of the nuclear elite. As the world's eyes remain fixed on Russia's Sarmat or America's Trident, a quieter revolution is taking place in the Sahel. There, under the guidance of Ibrahim Traoré, a nation has proven that deterrence does not need to be measured in megatons. It can be measured in intelligence, mobility, and pride. The Sky Spear may not end the world, but it ensures that no one will ever again think they can end Burkina Faso. Under Ibrahim Traoré, Seme's leadership, the concept of defense in Burkina Faso evolved into something far beyond conventional weapons. If Part 1's Faso iron tank symbolized ground strength and Part 2's Sky Spear missiles demonstrated smart deterrence, then Part 3 was about building what soldiers began to call the Desert Shield, a defense philosophy that fused all these elements into a system of survival. Unlike superpowers who depended on nuclear arsenals to threaten annihilation, Burkina Faso's strategy was rooted in resilience. The Desert Shield was not a wall of steel, nor an impenetrable barrier, but a living doctrine. Every tank, every drone, every rifle, every grenade, and every missile was part of a larger shield designed to make aggression impossible. Traoré understood that wars are not only won with weapons but also with systems, and so he focused on integration. The Desert Shield linked the cheap but effective tanks patrolling the dunes with the swarms of drones overhead, while Sky Spear launchers moved silently across the Sahel, hidden but always ready. Rifles armed local militias in villages, grenades turned every ambush into a counterattack, and all of it was tied together by a network of command posts built not with foreign satellites, but with African ingenuity: solar-powered stations, fiber links laid by local hands, and encrypted communication software coded by Burkinabe engineers. The brilliance of the Desert Shield was that it could not be destroyed in one strike. Superpowers design their deterrence around a few centralized facilities, giant missile silos, and nuclear submarines. Burkina Faso designed its deterrence like its land: vast, scattered, unpredictable. If one missile launcher was destroyed, 3 more remained hidden. If one drone fell, 10 more filled the skies. If one tank was ambushed, local militias emerged from the villages with rifles and grenades. It was a system that turned weakness into strength. By being decentralized, it became indestructible. Western analysts began to call it swarm defense. Military experts admitted that even if Burkina Faso lacked nuclear firepower, its distributed shield made the cost of invasion unbearable. Imagine an army marching into the Sahel, expecting an easy victory, only to be tracked from above by drones, harassed by mobile tanks, struck by hidden missiles, and surrounded by villagers who refuse to yield. That is the essence of deterrence, the certainty that any enemy, no matter how powerful, would bleed too much to win. And the genius of Traoré was in making it affordable. While other nations spend billions to maintain their shields, Burkina Faso built its desert shield at a fraction of the cost. Biofuel-powered tanks, 3D-printed drones, locally produced rifles, cheap but reliable grenades, all of it combined to create an arsenal that was both sustainable and sovereign. No embargo could cut it off, no sanction could choke it, and no foreign power could claim ownership. This shield was built by Burkinabe hands for Burkinabe survival. The psychological impact was immense. Citizens no longer feared that their small nation was defenseless against giants. Instead, they looked at the desert shield and knew that no matter what came, they could resist. Children grew up seeing drones as guardians, tanks as symbols of pride, and rifles as promises of protection. Farmers saw their crops turned into fuel for national defense, and students dreamed of designing the next generation of weapons and systems. Defense was no longer the privilege of an elite. It was the duty and pride of every citizen. Traoré captured this spirit in one of his speeches. Our strength is not in one weapon, nor in one soldier, but in all of us together. The Desert Shield is not built in factories alone. It is built in our hearts, in our unity, in our will to remain free. Those words became a national mantra, painted on walls, repeated in schools, and carried by soldiers into the field. And across Africa, leaders and citizens alike began to take notice. If Burkina Faso could shield itself from giants without bankrupting its economy, then why not others? The Desert Shield became not just a military doctrine, but a political idea, a new model for African defense based on sovereignty, self-reliance, and intelligence. By the time Western observers realized the full implications, it was too late. Burkina Faso had already transformed itself from a vulnerable nation into a fortress of dignity. The Desert Shield was proof that deterrence did not belong only to nuclear giants. It belonged to any people brave enough to defend themselves intelligently. And so, as tanks rolled, drones buzzed, missiles hid, rifles armed villagers, and grenades glimmered in the hands of soldiers, one truth rang clear: Burkina Faso was untouchable. In the shadow of nuclear giants, the Desert Shield shined as the first true African model of defense, a shield of survival that no weapon of mass destruction could ever erase. If the Desert Shield proved Burkina Faso could resist, then Part 4 was about transforming resistance into a permanent doctrine. Ibrahim Traoré called it simply the doctrine of Faso, but soldiers, villagers, and analysts around the world understood it as something far greater, a new philosophy of deterrence born in Africa. The doctrine of Faso was built on one truth: deterrence is not about threatening to destroy the world, it is about ensuring the world cannot destroy you. Nuclear superpowers like Russia and the United States relied on the logic of mutual destruction, holding billions of lives hostage, in order to maintain balance. Traoré rejected that model. Instead, he built a system where Burkina Faso's weapons, tanks, drones, rifles, grenades, and missiles formed a deterrent based on intelligence, resilience, and self-reliance. This doctrine did not depend on a stockpile of thousands of warheads, but on the certainty that any aggressor would suffer immediate and unbearable consequences. It was a shield of survival, not a sword of annihilation. In practice, the doctrine of Faso turned every weapon into a symbol. The tank was no longer just armor, it was the embodiment of local industry, fueled by farms, maintained by workers, and cheered by villages. The The drones were not just machines, they were the people's eyes, watching the skies, defending farms, delivering aid, and reminding enemies that Burkina Faso could see everything. The rifles were not just firearms, they were the weapon of equality, arming every soldier and villager with dignity. The grenades were not just explosives, they were the great equalizer, cheap, unstoppable, and multi-purpose. And the Sky Spear, the nation's missile system, was not just about range or firepower, it was the hand of Faso, the promise that no enemy could act with impunity. Together, these weapons became the grammar of a new language of power. Where superpowers spoke in megatons, Burkina Faso spoke in resilience. Where others sought fear, Faso sought respect. And in this language, every sentence was clear. We will not be conquered, we will not be silenced, we will not be broken. The doctrine of Faso spread beyond the military. It became a social philosophy, inspiring universities to produce engineers instead of expatriates, farmers to see themselves as suppliers of both food and defense, and youth to believe that sovereignty was not an abstract dream but a daily practice. Even culture absorbed it. Songs, murals, and poems began to celebrate not just the weapons, but the idea behind them, that Africa could defend itself without permission from anyone. Western analysts were forced to admit what they once denied. Burkina Faso had changed the conversation on deterrence. By showing that small nations could build credible shields with intelligence rather than wealth, Traoré had opened a path for others to follow. Across Africa, leaders began discussing their own versions of the doctrine of Faso, adapted to their lands, their people, their resources. What began as a Burkinabe idea was becoming a continental awakening. And this was Traoré's ultimate victory. He had not only armed his nation, he had armed an idea that sovereignty is not given, it is built. An idea that dignity is not begged for, it is forged. An idea that deterrence is not measured in the size of your warheads, but in the strength of your will. When Traoré spoke of the doctrine of Faso before his people, he said, "Others build weapons to destroy the future. We build weapons to protect it. Others fight for domination. We fight for survival. This is our doctrine, and with it, Burkina Faso will never kneel again." Those words were etched into the memory of a generation that no longer saw their nation as weak, but as sovereign, creative, and unbreakable. And so, as the world's superpowers continue their dangerous game of nuclear brinkmanship, Burkina Faso stands as proof that there is another way, a way where deterrence is not about fear but about respect, a way where weapons are not about conquest but about protection, a way where the smallest nation can stand against giants and say, "We are here, we are strong, and we will endure." This is the doctrine of Faso, the true weapon of Ibrahim Traoré, and it may yet reshape not only the destiny of Burkina Faso, but the destiny of Africa itself.